All right, we are going to get started now. We're up over almost 80 participants on the call. So, hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, Overcoming Barriers to Collaboration. My name is Kevin Rodier, and I'll be your host for this five-part webinar series. On behalf of everyone at the New Jersey section of the American Water Works Association, thank you for joining us. At AWWA, we believe there's great value in advancing collaboration across the water industry. And that's why we're so excited for this webinar series that's going to explore solutions to a number of common barriers that exist for all of us. Our aim in putting the series together is to, one, explore our roles within the water industry and how each of us contributes to our goal of providing clean, safe water. Two, understand the interpersonal challenges we face and the strategies we use to address them. And three, hear firsthand insights from the experts who are driving our efforts forward. During today's session, we'll be exploring the challenges of a multi-generational workforce, but this is just one of 5 sessions. So before we get into today's, we're going to break down the remainder of the series. So at the end of today's session, we are going to share the link for you all to register for session 2, areas of expertise, which we'll be holding on April 3rd. Areas of expertise will explore the dynamics between different functional areas of the water industry and how we can improve collaboration between engineers, operators, communicators, and really all other stakeholders in the water industry. In June, we'll launch session 3, Differing Landscapes, where we'll be discussing the role that utility size and customer demographics can play in our work. Session 4, Representation Matters, will launch in September, and we'll delve into the issues of race, gender, and their intersectionality. Finally, in November, we're going to wrap things up with session 5, One Common Goal, where we'll cap the series with insight from leaders of some of the most collaborative and exciting programs in the water industry. So each session is going to feature an introduction story or a background presentation of the topic, as well as a panel discussion on the subject. And if you're hearing that and thinking that this is a lot of talking to people about their experiences, you're right. And I'm going to be honest with everybody on the call right now. If you're looking for something where we're breaking down cutting edge research or sharing tons of data and the latest innovations, this isn't for you. What we're doing here with this webinar series is providing honest and open discussions that help build towards the goal of improving our ability to collaborate. And that ability is rooted in connection and understanding how personal experiences shape who we are. And that's why in putting together session 1, our planning team posed this question: how are the experiences of water workers different between generations? And as you think about that, just a few housekeeping items for everyone. First, you'll see that Liz dropped in the chat our code of conduct policy. So we ask that by participating in the series, you adhere to that policy and be respectful in all of our interactions. For those interactions, as we move through the program, feel free to react at any time and also use the Q&A to ask questions. We've designated a period of time at the end of the panel, and we're going to try to hit as many of those as possible. So to help us break down this question a little bit more and explain our multi-generational workforce, I am pleased to welcome in our first guest speaker of the series, New Jersey AWWA Executive Director, Mona Cavicoli. So Mona, if you could start your video, come off mute, and we will get rolling. I'm going to spotlight you for everybody, and I'm going to go off mute, turn off my camera, and I'm going to hand it over to you at this point.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kevin. And I am so thrilled to see how many people signed up and are attending today. So thank you. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm just giving a very quick few minutes overview before today's discussion begins. So I actually don't have any grand statistics for you on generational differences. Most of what I'm sharing with you is just my observations from being 30 years involved in AWWA. So while AWWA collects as much demographic information as they can, what they have really is kind of moderate at best because it's all based on what people input when they become a member or put into their membership profile. So right now, in the New Jersey section, if you consider that we have about 900 individual members, so I'm not counting utilities or service providers or anybody who's currently late on the dues, but about 900 individual members, just 17% of those people are 35 or under, and 45% are 50 or under. And I took a look at the Minnesota section, who I also work with, and their statistic is pretty similar, although they actually look like they might be a little younger than us. They have about 750 individual members right now. 22% of their members are 35 or under, and 50% are 50 or under. But if you think about that, that leaves a really big percentage that are over 50. And that's even, considering not everybody reports their information. So I'm in that big gap because I'm 56 and I became an AWWA volunteer in 1992. And from what I know from looking at that data to collect my statistics, there are a whole lot of people born after 1992. Um, so when I became a volunteer in 1992, from what I could tell, there were 8 women involved in the New York section, including me, just 8. And when I became the New York section's first ever paid staff person in 1995, I was the youngest as well as the only woman to sit in a section board meeting ever. So that was a big deal. And there was a gentleman on that board who had actually been on the New York section board since the year I was born. So my my first introduction to generational differences happened with that gentleman. It was one of my first board meetings, and I remember talking very excitedly about new things we could do and change in the section. And that man looked across the board table from me and he said, "We did change. We got you, didn't we?" So in those early years, I was called young lady, I was called sweetheart, I was called honey. I was very often treated like a secretary. And I think just, many of the people I was working with at that time just didn't know how to react to a young person joining the ranks of leadership. I'm pleased that as my time with AWWA has progressed over the last 3 decades, I have seen a really large influx of younger people involved in the organization. And I've seen the association, I've seen AWWA really step forward in encouraging and embracing participation by young professionals. And it's a good thing, it really is. But it does create challenges. And, in a way, it's almost like we've moved from an atmosphere where that perspective of children should be seen and not heard. And now we're in an environment where all ages are merging together. And so we are forced to adapt and accept that there are indeed generational differences, between people. And it does affect the workplace. So I find myself struggling, in my own mind, I still think that I'm 35, but I just constantly see situations where I realize, where I'm starting to fit on that generational scale. And there are things like technology and communication, confidence skills, um, just skill sets in general, child rearing and parenting practices, societal perceptions. These are all things that I think affect that generational differences and what we'll probably be talking about today. So, I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I know, like Kevin said, despite all of our differences, because we're all involved in AWWA, we have common ground in our love of water and protecting public health, and that we will find more and more common ground despite our differences and our perspectives. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm really honored that I was chosen to be the first guest speaker and welcome you all. And Kevin, that's what I had to share. And I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Well, thank you, Mona. That was fantastic. I loved what you said about you joined and they just figured, oh, well, we added somebody, that's the change, and kind of ignored the cultural aspects of changing the actual organization and the values of the organization that come with that. So thank you for sharing that. And we wouldn't have anybody else kick this thing off, right? So at this point, I'm going to ask our panelists to come off mute and start their videos. And what I'm going to do is, Mona, you can go off and I'm going to start changing our spotlights here as we go through introductions. I'll skip ahead here. All right. So from Gen Z, we are pleased to welcome Ben Jobeck, Community Outreach Specialist from New Jersey Future. From the millennial generation, please welcome Taylor Carden, Superintendent of Production at Veolia North America. For Gen X, Kareem Adeem, Director of Newark Water and Sewer. And finally, for the baby boomers, Chris Andreessen, Vice President Engineering at Middlesex Water Company. And I see, Chris, you shaking your head there.
What can I say?
So Ben, if you could just come off mute, and thank you all for joining us. We are so excited to be kicking this off with the four of you. So I know we are actually right on schedule, which is impressive. I didn't think that was going to happen, but we're going to get right into this. So last month, Bloomberg featured an article titled "America's Next Water Crisis: A Lack of Experienced Workers." That article cited data that showed that 88% of treatment plant operators were 45 or older, and that 88% is compared with 45% for the national workforce. So Taylor's image was featured in that article. So we are going to start with Taylor on that one. What do you make of those numbers and what has been your experience?
Well, wow, I didn't know you were going to reference that article. So I am a licensed operator. I have a T2 and a W2. And I found that the local culture at Veolia very much focuses on kind of bringing up operators and encouraging people in all disciplines to get exposure to operations. I actually started out in engineering, so I made a little bit of a pivot. I think the biggest kind of challenge is just getting people the training time, and getting them familiar with the regs and having them know exactly what steps are required to obtain their licenses. So any sort of outreach that we can all be doing in our own organizations to kind of encourage the younger generation would definitely impact those numbers.
So Chris and Kareem, I know you also have, you work with utilities. You've probably seen similar things. So what have you seen at your workplaces?
I'll kick it off. I mean, certainly getting people into the succession for licensed operators is an issue. I can remember way back when I started, it was almost licensed operators were very careful about giving the experience to let there be other licensed operators. It was kind of protected. So, I guess there was an abundance or nobody was really thinking about the future. So it was really something that was protected. I mean, recently, last 10 years or more, it's getting people to want to do the training and see the value of being the licensed operators. Similar, we're encouraging it through incentives, through training, just trying to get more and more people into the cycle of getting the experience. And then I remember going to an operator class early on, and I was the engineer and with a lot of licensed operators, and I was singled out by the professors as, oh yes, and we have an engineer in the room. And since I was the only one with a tie on, it was pretty obvious that it was me. And so initially there was a little apprehension, but by the end of it, just talking with everybody, it was great bonding. They brought a lot of experiences that I didn't have. I had some of the, you know, every time we would take a test, they'd, get up close to me and look over my shoulder, and but again, it was trying to build their confidence and my confidence and just working together towards the common things. But I think getting people into the cycle of getting that license, it's not this big thing that you can't do, and it's just part of your internal growth. But it's definitely something that I know we've been talking about at the state level, at the company level, at the association level for a long time. I think there's a little bit of improvement, but I think there's still a lot of work to do.
And Kevin, I just want to say, and I'm looking back when I started, maybe 30 something years ago when I started, I'm looking back that everybody held everything to their chest. Similar to what Chris said, the licensed operators, they held it like this. They didn't want to show you anything, right? They didn't want to tell you anything. I remember maybe 7 years I'm on the job and I just happened to walk by. I was in the front office for something. I just see a poster on the board that says licensed operator classes, right? It was at the community college. So I grabbed the poster off the board, made a copy, went up to the front office. Hey, can I take that class? We don't have no money for it. So it was like this. It was like they protected the old timers that had the license. They didn't want anybody to gain that license, right? Or get a license. So eventually, a person like me, I had to actually pay for the class myself. Didn't get reimbursed by the city. And then when I got a license, it was like, how you get a license? Right? Why did he sign? Who signed that paper for you? And I'm like, well, the license operator signed. He shouldn't have did that. So I just look at back then, I think, we didn't think about the future. So looking at what we do right now, when I became a director, this goes back to even when I was assistant director, we started bringing that training in-house. We made it mandatory, like within a year of your employment, you got to enroll in a class, right? To make it easy for you, we brought the classes in to the water department doing work hours, right? We work with the local college, right? Or university, Essex County or Rutgers, and we had those classes on site at our job for the younger generation. And I think it's paying off for us. Do we lose a lot of operators? Yes. Do we train a lot of people that get licensed and they leave to go somewhere else? Yes. But I look at it that we're training operators for the future. I look at it that we're not, sitting back, holding everything to our chest again. Like we're trying to groom the future generation to take over this water work. It's going to get serious. Right now in New Jersey, we're fighting. I mean, I always look around. I look on LinkedIn and I always see somebody's with Viola today. They with New Jersey American tomorrow. Now they're down in Middlesex. Then they down in they up in North, or they up in State Valley. And I'm looking like, how these people just move around so much, right? It's very competitive because everybody want, licensed operators, experienced licensed operators, not just licensed, but they experience.
Yeah.
So I figured, with us, we took a little bit out of our book and we started pairing our young people that came in. We started pairing them up with a mentorship program. At first, some of and I'm gonna just say the old timers, they pushed back a little bit. Right? It was a little pushback. They don't want to, but working with some of those young people, they start seeing the benefit, right? Technology, one of them, right? The young people start helping them with technology and letting them see that they can do things smarter, not harder. And I think it's paying off. It was like a trust factor that had to be built. And once that was built, it made it easier.
Yeah. So let me switch to our youngest panelist, our Gen Z representative, who's in the nonprofit space. So I'm curious as to at New Jersey Future in the nonprofit space, or even in your community outreach, do you see kind of that, what Kareem and Chris mentioned, that holding in that knowledge? Do you see that pushback from older generations that you're working with?
Yeah, and I work with utilities every single day, and It is stark to see sometimes when I'm not going to hit on South Jersey, but a lot of 80, some 90-year-old operators down there, and it is genuinely pretty scary as a 20-year-old. You're like, what if someone gets pneumonia, what's going on? You know? So I do see like the holding things closer to their chests, but I think Gen Z walking into the room and it not being a millennial, it's an even more stark realization. It's like, oh, this is like the second or third generation coming in here that has grown into the space. Maybe it's time to start passing some of this information down, but it can be like pulling teeth to even get a lot of stuff handed over, just because they enjoyed being an operator, and that's fine. But it's time for the next generation, and I think especially in South Jersey, it would be really beneficial for programs to really start coming into communities like we just heard about them doing in Newark, to start building the capacity down there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what does the age diversity look like at New Jersey Future?
I think it's the full spectrum, to be honest with you. I think we go from Gen Z to baby boomers. But a lot of the staff is in the younger generation and in Gen Z. And I think over the last 2 years, we've spent a good deal of time trying to chip away and break through any apprehension to, let's say, 2020 forward technology and communications tactics, because we are not in the same world as the 2010s or the early 2000s. That was like the dawn of technology, and it is integrated into every facet of what we are doing now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a big piece of the younger generation having to like force the acknowledgement that we need to move forward and do new things because we are not in the same world.
So let me pause there. I'm going to ask Mona to throw up because Ben just mentioned communication across generations. So I'm going to ask Mona to throw up the communication methods poll for our audience to chime in. So if everybody could chime in on what your preferred method of communication is. Obviously, we know after the pandemic, everything changed, right? This Zoom probably would not have happened before the pandemic. Nobody would even think about it. I'm on Teams all day. I'm sure you all have your messages. So I'm curious as to how you all prefer to communicate with other people at your organizations. Don't all jump at once.
Oh, you're asking us.
I'm
I thought
asking
we were
you,
waiting on
Chris.
Paul.
No,
Oh,
we're gonna let those poll results come in. What? So,
no,
Chris,
no
yeah,
worries. I am
you're victim one.
100% in person. Well, 90% in person. I value in person. I continually preach it here, whether it's an in-person meeting. We just had a DEP Water Supply Advisory Council meeting in person on Friday, the first one probably of 6 months or so. And it was hard to get everybody there. And I almost couldn't go, and I almost didn't go because it sure would have been easier to sit at home and just click on Zoom or Teams. But I'm so glad a lot of people showed up, and where you can, in person. The statistics are it's all about communication is body English and nonverbal communication. And while Teams helps with facial expressions and tone, you miss a lot of the other things. So that's my vote.
And Kevin, I want to jump in, and I think I'm an in-person guy. I feel like I value talking to people in person. Especially the workforce. I mean, I don't want them to think I'm unapproachable, right? Because when I look at that unapproachable, that's me starting to work 30-something years ago, and everybody holding stuff to their chest or not showing you anything. I think in person, you build a little bit of trust in your relationships with the younger generation, the workforce. The Teams, the Zooms, the virtual stuff has made it kind of impossible nowadays to meet a lot of people in person, because you do, like Chris said, you do get lazy. I mean, it done made you lazy where you just want to sit back and click on the camera and be like, click, turn on, and I can see everybody and say, okay, I'm done. But yes, in person, I think it is great, especially when you're building trust and really getting to know somebody.
Well, a lot of the audience agrees with you. The top two preferred methods are email and in person, followed by messaging apps like Teams or Slack or, similar things. Taylor, Ben, thoughts?
I would say when I started working, probably email, and have now transitioned to in person. I think one of our challenges in our office specifically is that as we've kind of scaled up the organization, we're running out of space to meet in person. And so it's really hard to gather. And that's one of the things that I would love to see us kind of like work towards improving so that we can meet in person more frequently. One of our challenges with return to office post COVID was we would still have the features to meet via Teams, or we use Google, and people would be joining these like chats from their cubicles next to each other, and so we'd all be plugged into like the same meeting, and it would be like, but it's hard to capture people at home and a group in a meeting room. So I think it has to go one way or the other, and I'd much prefer to be in person.
Hate to do it. No, I think for this industry and a lot of the things that we all do, an in-person meeting is critical. Like if I'm going to a utility and I'm not gonna be walked around on a phone camera and be shown the systems. Like it's virtually impossible. Though I think there is definitely a technology barrier to how people use Zoom, Google Meets, or whatever. I do a lot of work outside of New Jersey Future on Zoom with members of Gen Z. We use Zoom very differently, and it can feel really uncomfortable in workspaces to be using it the way we do, because we use the chat functions and sometimes you're popping things in while other people are speaking. And in a workplace, that's like, that's my boss. I'll wait to say something, and then you're too far out of the conversation for that chat to even matter. I personally very much like using informal communication to try to get as much information out of people, and I use chat functions, whether it was Teams or a Google Meets function, to have regular conversations. But I think that can feel like really uncomfortable for some people, and also uncomfortable between generations.
Do you think it's a level of like formality in the workplace? Like,
Yes.
do you see do you see pushback from an older generation saying, well, they're just so like, they're not trying that hard. They're just chatting it up. Like, I remember as a millennial logging on to AOL and loading up AIM with my silly username back in the day. And I feel like there's a connotation where it's like, oh yeah, if you're chatting during this, you're not actually paying attention.
That's exactly it. Yeah. And I think it's all based around the level of formality of like how we do things. And look, I agree, Gen Z's gotta click in a little bit and realize where they are in the room sometimes. But we live in a very different, fast-paced world where we've been asked our entire lives to do things pretty quickly. And like, if you're in a classroom and you were in Gen Z, you're probably like texting or submitting something really quick to a teacher via a chat or an email, or you're in like a Google workspace for your classroom. So the way we grew up, that's how we function and send information and communicate quicker. So I think that in person is amazing, and it serves a amazing function. But as more Gen Z come into the workplace, we're probably going to be pushing more informal forms of communication, especially with the workloads that we are all facing.
Okay, Chris, I see a lot of nodding over there. What's going through your head
Sure.
right
I
now?
guess one thing to Taylor's point, we've seen, I agree 100%, trying to have those hybrid meetings are sometimes a disaster just because the community, it just doesn't work really well. But we've seen some technology advances with new products where we've actually been able to have some of those much better than we used to. And, you know, where we have two conference rooms full of people and they're beamed together with the technology and the acoustics, and it's gotten better. And so they've been productive. But yeah, I agree on, you know, early on, it's just, are you in the room or are you out of the room? And there was a divide that was right there. I think the struggle I have, and maybe it's just, you know, I'm winding down. I just can't keep up with all the different communications coming in on a Teams meetings. You got chat meetings coming in here, someone's talking over there, emails are popping in because we all have email up when we're on a Teams meeting just to not miss anything. So that's the struggle I have. And so then, you know, we have some of those collaboration meetings where, you know, everybody's physically there or in the meeting on Zoom, but are they really there? And, you know, so, you know, a big part of that is to keep your cameras on, right? Just out of respect for everybody who's there. But it's just, there's so much in, you know, as you said, the workload, the demands and all the different demands. And it's just, it's a challenge. And, you know, is it a more complicated time? Absolutely. Not sure what we do about it.
So
But I think that hybrid solution that we're doing, we found real good success with that, where we're able to do that. And that gives people the ability to come in person where they can. And if they can't, they log on. It's not as good, but it's still acceptable and productive.
Mhm. Yeah, and this part of the conversation, we're talking about all these things that are changing, new technologies coming in, and we're talking about communication styles, but I also want to think about innovation to our business systems, our processes, new contaminants emerging, everything. You know, we are changing so much about our industry, and kind of how did that look back when you were starting, I guess, for Chris or Kareem, in your careers with new technologies and new business systems compared to what that landscape looks like now?
Parts per thousand versus parts per trillion.
Sure.
I mean, there were challenges. There were challenges back then. You know, again, were they as technical as they are now? I mean, I remember when I started. You're going to laugh, but you know, I was the one who brought computers into the company with a Radio Shack TRS-80 computer with an 8-inch floppy disk, and I was looked at by, you know, my peers or the, you know, the superintendents, everybody. What are you bringing that thing in for? What's that going to do? What's that going to do? So I think the challenges were there. They were maybe not as diverse and all over the place. But yeah, I remember when we were trying to just address, you know, a couple of the parts per thousand as we're continually getting better and measuring things in more detail.
I think technology has, you know, the advances in technology has helped us and hurt us. You know, it's helped us because it identifies, you know, like Chris was saying, the parts per trillion, parts per billion. It identifies this stuff quicker, faster, easier. The problem is once it's identified, we're not ready to jump on, you know, what it just identified. We're not ready to, you know, with a plan of action of the stuff that it identified with us for, right? The funding, we're not ready with the funding. We're not ready with a plan of action. So, you know, technology can be great. It is great. But at the same time, you know, that same technology kind of hinders us when we're trying to get a plan together because we're not really ready. We're ready to use the technology, but when it gives us a result that we're not looking for, we're not ready to, you know, move forward with a plan of abatement.
So,
and financially, we don't have the money. A lot of us.
Yeah. So, I mean, and we'll touch on the money in session 3 a little bit. But for today, when we're thinking about the multi-generational workforce and those new technologies coming in, like Chris, you said it when you were trying to bring computers in from Radio Shack, you got resistance to that change.
Mhm.
How do you overcome that resistance? How can Taylor or Ben come into the workplace as younger generations and implement those changes and get over that pushback?
Well, I think I'm seeing it with some of our younger generation. You have to earn the trust of everybody else. You can't come in and just expect it to be handed to you as with an entitlement mentality and whatever. And I've got a story of when I came in, I was the young engineer, the kid, and you had all our water operators and everything else. And I'm like, oh, they wouldn't even allow me out on a main break to see it, but I finally went out on one, and I'm observing, and what are you doing here? And I'm the fifth wheel, and the superintendent I got to know a little bit or whatever, and they were having a problem with putting the main back in service, flushing it out, and every time they were flushing it, they were opening a valve, and the water would come up, fill the hole, the mud would go back in the pipe, blah blah blah, and they did this for like 3 times, and I'm off in the corner, and I said, well, why don't you just go try and turn the valve? And the valve was a long way away, so it took a while for the water to get there. Turn the valve a couple times, count to 10, close the valve. And they look at me, what? And, so they go ahead and they do that. And they did it, and they're on radios because that's all we had. And, no water's coming out. And they look over at you, with a glare. What are you talking about? See, it's not working. Hold on. And then a little blurb comes through. And then it goes, well, that's not enough. And then I said, hold on. And then it comes out. And then, it was still a little bit too much or whatever. But at the end of that, didn't say anything, didn't go for any kind of accommodation or anything like that, just walked away. And, he just looks over and he just, oh, okay. And so you have to earn it, and whatever that means to others. And, yeah, we have to receive it and want it. And I think the folks are doing it. We're seeing it. And but I think Kareem mentioned something, in person, making yourself accessible, making sure that, oh, I can't go talk to Kareem, he's the director, just going out there. You've got to make and I try to do it, probably not as much as I should. Go make the first move and go see them in their space and talk to them and get to know them a little bit. So it's a little bit, you break down that barrier of, ooh, the superintendent or the director or the vice president.
I mean, that does a lot for people in like my generation. I would imagine same with Taylor, but like sometimes you're looking up and you're like, oh God, those names really do put a lot of pressure on you, and you being in Gen Z and I guess millennial, we got crapped on for a while. So
did baby boomers back in the in the 70s and the 80s,
So I think there's a little bit of fear to chip away before you even have like the informal conversation with your supervisor to know that they're like on the same level of a human as you. But that is something that our executive director tries to do right in the beginning, to open the channel right away. And coming from the previous place that I worked at, it did miles. Like it's incredible for how that helps.
Yeah,
I agree on her, and I've seen the value of that once I do that with people. So sorry, Taylor.
No, I was just going to add, I think something that was formative about my experience joining the industry was being invited into those spaces. And half the time I would go to meetings and I'd be like, why am I invited to this? I have no idea what's going on. I'd maybe capture like 5%. I didn't know any of the terminology. And after a while, I kind of, developed the language and the proficiency. But it's something that Mona said at the beginning actually stuck out to me. I would be tasked with like taking notes or like running the meeting or like kind of keeping some of the admin things going when I first started out. And I had a really hard time discerning if it was because I was a woman, if it was because I was young. And in retrospect, I gained a lot of good experience by doing that, but it wasn't super clear to me like why I was being tasked with those things. So I wish that was more clear when I was starting out. And I've been seeing, in terms of like the multitasking, I've been seeing a lot of young people invited into spaces that I'm participating in now, kind of like at the mid manager level. And there's that perception, right, that they're distracted because they're maybe doing something else or responding to chats. And so I think it's important to kind of like assign things to these young people coming in, ask them to think about one certain aspect of a project or ask them to take notes and share them with the group. And I think it would engage the younger kind of generation a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I want to hit we're going to move to some of the Q&A here. And Kareem, I'll let you chime in after this. But one of the questions asked in the Q&A kind of leads into this conversation. And it's, how would you suggest someone new to the water industry connect with a mentor to help them explore the opportunity to become a licensed operator, or really just, I guess, mentorship in general? What does that role play? How do you get that started?
Ask someone to be your mentor. I know that's a hard thing to do.
How do you find the right person?
Well, there are, I look at it, the two approaches to mentoring. One is the structured program that goes in there and has all your assignments, the structure and whatever. And then the other is, you in the communication, you see people that maybe you respect, or you say, hey, wow, look at that. That's very interesting. It's intimidating, to be sure. And I've been down that road. But when I've asked folks at various levels, early on in the career, I read a book somewhere or whatever, a board of advisors outside of the company. And, it was a pain in the neck. And I was very afraid of a lot of these, what happens when you get rejected. But I will tell you that I didn't get rejected once. And I don't think that's up to me. That's up to the people I ask, because you can tell they have a genuine interest in the business. And sometimes that's just it. They don't know you want to have a mentor, or I don't want to impose, hey, my philosophy and my wisdom on you. I don't want, you have your life. And so I think it's that initial barrier. And, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But I have benefited throughout my career with a number of these where, I've got plenty where it landed on me, to be sure, but where I went out and I asked.
Yeah.
So I think that show that initiative, or show that willingness that that's what you want to do. The other stuff's going to happen no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll let one more person chime in before we move to the next question.
And Chris, I'll say, I'm a quick scenario. One of my chief engineers, he probably was 18 months, my chief engineer in the water, he probably was 18 months before he was going to retire. We knew that. A lot of us knew that. Remember back in 2015, we brought in like 6 interns for the summer. And I give him 2 of them. He says, what am I going to do with these kids? What am I supposed to do with these kids? They don't know anything. And, the first 2 weeks, he got them filing papers and doing this and doing that. And then, week 3, I walk in and they're in the development meeting, and I'm sitting there, and the young kids are, he's going to say young kids, they're actually running the meeting. Now, 2 weeks ago, he's telling me, what am I going to do with these kids, right? Prior to him leaving, he was like, man, it's the best thing that happened. Why didn't you get him early? I'm sitting there saying, you ain't even want him, right? He said, it's the best thing happened. Why did you get him early? Look, they set this up. I got this stuff digital. I got that. And I'm sitting there like, you ain't even want him. But it just shows like the mentors are there. Yep. They may act like they don't want to mentor somebody too, but they really do. Yeah. And still to this day, this guy's retired, but he answers the phone. He stops by and come talk to him. And it's like, that's the rapport he built.
And I want to quickly jump in on the opposite scale, because you guys are the mentors. I'm the mentee. You have to offer something. Like, if you're going to ask someone to, it's generally, you're not genuinely asking for a mentorship. You're not going to say those words most likely. But it's like, if you're gonna ping questions and whatever off of someone in a higher role or in leadership, do something for them first. And they will grant you all the wishes in the world if you put a line out there to offer yourself up first. And it's worked out really well for me in the water industry, and same thing with politics. So
that's great advice.
And Kev, I just want to say the reason why I said that about this guy, right? Because the young interns, they upgraded a lot of technology the technology that we thought was good, they came in and just upgraded, right? Because he would come to me and say, hey, they got a new program. Do you think we can get this? I'm like, how much it costs? Yeah, let's get it. Let's get it.
Yeah.
So
what I'm hearing is that like they were given the opportunity to actually implement change. And that goes to another one of our questions that our audience asked is what more could be done to make water or utilities more enticing and interesting for younger professionals. And I think that gets at it, because when you're given the opportunity to do something, that's what we want. But I want it, Taylor, what do you think?
I think one of the challenges that we have right now is that there's not a ton of entry-level opportunities. And so we're looking for people at the mid-career and looking for these experts in fields. And like the good ones are already doing something, they're happy where they're at, or they recently made a move, to Kareem's point. So, when a lot of the turnover that we've been experiencing is because of retirements. And so you're losing someone who has 20, 30, 40 years of experience. You're looking to replace that. And I think we need to kind of turn that on its head and say, okay, instead of, finding someone who's like that seasoned, or trying to find an equivalent or an exact replacement for them, how can we kind of get people at different tiers into the organization? And I think if there's more entry-level opportunities, that's more opportunity also to then go out into communities and like seek out these people who are starting to consider what to do with their careers. When I first graduated from college, I applied to a bunch of internships at my current company and I didn't get any. There were no entry-level positions. It was all like 5-10 years experience. And so I had to wait a little bit. And the only reason I ended up back is because I pursued it so heavily. But we can't expect that of people, go do something for 5 years and then come talk to me. So what can we do to open up opportunities for people just out of college, or even at the labor level, maybe just out of high school?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
all right,
Kevin, you mentioned make it more exciting. Again, I think the big thing for the water industry is a sense of purpose. It's a really important purpose, public service that's out there. We're not the .coms or all the fancy technology and everything else. We're trying to bring that in, but that's not really the driver, making millions of dollars, on Wall Street or whatever it is. But it's a heck of a purpose. And I think that's one that we have to promote more. It's important. There's a lot in it. I see starting to make inroads on, the public doesn't just believe it's an entitlement. It just gets there magically to your doorstep. But I think we've seen it's a great purpose, and just to really promote that more.
And
okay.
We call it the invisible infrastructure, but it's like the invisible job market as well for like the water industry. So I echo what Taylor said in opening more entry level with the ability to sort of, if someone's leaving soon, train them up. We do that at New Jersey Future. Like you're not in like the role, but you are sitting next to that person who might be leaving in 3 to 5 years every day in every meeting, learning the aspects that made them great.
Yeah. And I do have a hand in the audience, one of our AWWA board members. So I'm going to ask her if she wants to come off mute to ask her question. So I'm going to give her a second there.
Are you talking to me, Kevin?
Yeah. Chelsea Culp.
Question?
Yeah. You have your hand raised.
Oh, I did not mean to do that. My apologies.
All right. Then I'm throwing you off.
But
So
Kevin,
let me ask
Kevin, you do have another. Rich
Okay.
Calby in the audience, sorry.
All right. Yeah, so Rich, I'm gonna here we go. I'm gonna ask you to come off mute if you want to ask your question, and then I'll go to one more from our Q&A, and then all right, Rich, you're on.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand as well.
Okay, all right, that's all right. We'll hit it next time. So one more question in the chat for our panelists. How has technology advancement been impacted due to generational gaps in decision-making positions at water utilities? So I know I've seen it, a lot of decision-making positions are with our older generations. Do you think that is a hindrance to the advancement of technology? And we have 2 minutes on this one, and then we're going.
It has allowed us to retain some of that institutional knowledge, right? Some of the stuff that technology has allowed us to come in and get some of the institutional knowledge from the people that's about to retire or moving on, because we brought some of these systems in and we can get that data into the systems. We'll never, and I say we'll never understand everything they know, but the little part that they did leave with us in using the technology has allowed us to at least have a bigger footprint moving forward.
And I think technology certainly is letting us to track things and metrics and statistics and everything else. That's a bit of a challenge, though, to get your systems in place to be able to accumulate that data. But then, go with a professor that I did many years ago. We have to interpret the data. We just can't take it at face value because it's still, big data.
And real quick, Taylor and Ben, I'll let you chime in with final thoughts.
I think from the data perspective, yeah, garbage in, garbage out, right? So making sure that your data is clean. In my role, I manage a lot of data, and I'm making sure that our historian is running properly. And I'm oftentimes interpreting things for the engineering group who will pull something and say, hey, this looks kind of funny. So I think there's definitely opportunity for people to come into organizations and kind of serve that niche role and do the translation of okay, this is what we have and this is what it means. And be in those conversations where the decisions are being made, while also kind of listening to the senior level say, okay, given that, this is what we're going to do. And it's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah,
it's definitely important for Gen Z and younger generations to listen to why the decision process is being made, but from also the back end, Gen Z especially, and Gen Alpha that's coming, we can quickly recognize when a technology is not being used, and also from the outward facing angle of the utility, we can tell what century your technology is in pretty darn quick from just your website. And so just allowing, and that changes literally every 2 years at this point with how things look. So just allowing the younger staff to be in those meetings when those decisions are being made and listening to them a little bit of the technology, because I'm sorry, we may have not have as much experience in it, but we know what everyone else is viewing it as.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to wrap it up there. So Ben, Taylor, Kareem, Chris, thank you so much. Round of applause for you all. Thank you for coming on, sharing your thoughts. This was a fantastic opportunity to learn from all of you. So you can turn those videos off. We're just going to wrap things up here. Thank you again to our panelists. This was, I learned a lot. I hope our audience learned a lot. Great stuff from all around. So we are going to go back. I'm going to bring up the slides for just one more minute here. So if you are eager to keep learning on this subject, we have a couple resources for everyone. First book, Gentelligence. I'm in the middle of reading it right now. It's fantastic. Next up, we have the Bloomberg article that I referenced at the beginning of the panel. There's also a great EPA report on the water workforce. And then finally, a TED Talk. So check those out. The resources here, the slides, the recording of this webinar will be posted to our webinar webpage. And we're going to drop the link to that in the chat. And if you check out that link right now, you'll see that you're able to register for session 2 areas of expertise on April 3rd. So follow that right now, sign up. We touched on it in a couple of the questions, but in that session, we're going to be exploring the dynamics between all functional areas of the water industry. And we're also going to spotlight a specific utility that's doing some really great work in building relationships with their municipal partners. So sign up now, and then when this webinar closes, we're going to have a survey that is going to launch. So help us out to improve all the future sessions. Fill out that survey. And with that, I'd like to thank our panelists one more time, and to everyone watching, thank you for joining us and going beyond the surface, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you.